this one comes from fellow Michigan CEDH meetup member Gates. Hi Gates. We're going to answer your question. Hi Gates. So I'm going to take out the second part of the question because the first part only is a setup for it. So the second part of the question here is asking if you're actually playing to win, especially a league or an event, and playstyle isn't as important to you as winning, is there any reason not to go with an established list that has performed well in the past? So my thought on this is that there's always a reason not to do that. There's I see it 3 reasons why. The first reason is comfort level matters when you're playing a deck. Mm-hmm. This isn't 1v1 where you can say, where you can sit down in a modern tournament with Jund and say, I've got like a 55% matchup against everything, because that's what Jund does. Right. You can't do that here, because you're playing against 3 other people. Right. And if you're in a fully competitive environment, if everyone were to just play the best deck, at best you wind up in a bunch of mirror matches where, everything comes down to mulligans and luck and who's sitting where. That's not going to give you an advantage. If you're playing to win, you need to maximize the advantages you have. If you're not a great Naws player, maybe you don't want to take a Turbo Naws deck to an event, even if you think it's going to be the best deck for that event. So, for example...
Did you notice what I picked and didn't pick?
I was going to say the same thing. Like, the MLC draft, one of the ways that I ranked decks going into the draft was very much, how comfortable am I playing this deck? Yeah. I didn't rank many Naws decks very high, because I am not a very good Naws player. And I will fully admit that.
I mean, I can play Naws, just not Turbo Naws.
Yeah, exactly. So, I ended up taking Eureka, but that was because I have experience with it, right? And the other Naws deck I had ranked fairly highly was Zanala, because I have experience with it. But I wasn't going to take Rog Silas. I wasn't going to take Blue Farm. I think they're very, very good decks. Yeah. But I wasn't comfortable with them. Yeah. Because if we get into an event where you're not comfortable with something, you are actually losing percentage to other people if they are comfortable with what they're doing. Yeah. The second reason is because going just based off things that have performed well in the past leans too heavily into limited sample sizes. Wow. You can run very hot for one event and win an event with a deck that maybe isn't the best thing ever. For an example, Spleenface did very well at one of the Tier 1 events with a deck running the new ally commander, what's her name? Tazri. Yeah. And Zerda as a companion. And he did well. He did very well with it. Why did he do well with Tazri? Not General Tazri, the new one. The one that, pulls party members from, the top 8 cards in your deck. Yeah, it's an affinity. Yes. So, he did well with that. And there's probably a couple reasons for that. One, Spleenface is a very, very good player.
He's definitely above curve.
Yes. 2, he knows other decks really well, so he knows what they're doing. And 3, that's a surprise factor, right? Now, would that deck necessarily be something that we should play elsewhere, even though it performed well in tournament? No. That's results-oriented thinking. We need to think about the process. What decks have what things in place that you want to put together to be successful?
Right. Well, and there's a term for that. They call that playing with old tech. So the way it kind of works in, most 1v1 metas, especially Standard, Modern, Pioneer, things that are very rapidly changing, is that a deck will do really good week 1, and then everybody will jump to that deck for the next week. So then the next level of that will be to play what will be good against last week's decks. Mm-hmm. That's why there used to be an old extended deck called Next Level Blue. Because the whole point of that deck was to see what the ground zero was, and then kind of stay. If you're like a target shooter, you kind of lead your gun when you're shooting at range. Kind of the same thing, where you You are playing something that is anticipated to play against what did well, like what showed results previously. So you want to play what's ahead of that.
Right.
A good example is all of the rule of law decks that have been popping up, because the assumption is that a lot of people are playing Turbo Nas Dockside decks. So you want to play things that punish those. So you have a lot of rule of laws, a lot of null rods.
Yeah. And that leads into kind of the third reason why I think just necessarily playing a list that performed well previously isn't the best idea necessarily. It can be a good idea. I'm not saying never do it. But the third reason is many of these lists that do well in these events have been teched slightly to do well in that event. Yeah. So, for example, if you look at the decks that performed well in Time Twisted 4 versus the decks that performed well in Oktoberfest, they're different. And the reason they're different is because those tournaments had different structures, different format they were played in, because one was webcam and one was cockatrice, different limits on time. So Time Twisted 4 had 70-minute rounds. Oktoberfest had 75. Oktoberfest had 90 minutes rounds. That makes a world of difference.
And Oktoberfest was also they used a fluid round method where you would just queue in, so it was very much incentivized.
You would keep playing instead of getting Swiss matchups.
Yeah, so it was very incentivized to play fast.
And I think the other thing that opens up for is these meta buster decks that kind of come out of left field and end up taking everything, because they rely on that thought process of, I'm going to play these decks that have been proven to improve my chances of winning, and then you get beat out by something like Heliod the Suncrown, or, Kalia was doing really well in the last tournament, surprisingly. And we haven't seen a Kalia deck in Lord knows how long.
Kalia is actually really good, but it's really secretly a Turbo Nos list.
Mm-hmm.
And it uses Kalia predominantly as a cost reducer for Razaketh to act as a tutor.
But how many people know that, and how many people would see Kalia and think, oh yeah, that's a Turbo Nos deck that does this?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the other thing with this is, because EDH is social, and CEDH again is EDH, it's all social, there's so much that is out of your control. Right? Just from actual gameplay stuff of, you don't have any control over what your hand is going to be other than mulligans. And you don't have any control over seating order and all this other stuff. But also, if you are playing something that you know inside and out, but maybe other people, they might be familiar with it and maybe can play it at 50 or 60%, but you can play it at 90%, that's going to give you an advantage because they might not be sure what you're up to if you've got some spicy line or it's a complex deck that has many moving parts, and removing the wrong one at the wrong time doesn't matter for you, but it would matter to them. Right. That's another reason that going off the beaten path can be successful. But of course, there's also lots to show that sometimes just taking a deck that you're good with, and that's good in general, can do very well too. To use Spleenface again, he won a couple events with Razaketh, right?
Okay.
Razakats. Good deck. He's familiar with it. He's comfortable with it. Good player. Performed well for him.
Yep. All right.
Moral of the story, get good at your deck.
Get wrecked, scrub! There you go. There's the meme answer.